Stress. Yeah. So the reason why we want to bring stress up again is because, yeah, we are entering, the different time of year. Again, our environment is changing. Things are getting a little bit colder out. And so it does tend to be a more stressful time of year for people when the environment switches. We'll also be falling back an hour in a couple of weeks. And so that's another thing that's on people's minds.
Hate it.
And we'll also be heading into the holiday season. And so it comes fast. Once you hit November, we're basically getting ready for the holidays. And that was the whole reason why we started Hump Day at that time. And we approached it with this topic at this time last year. And so, if you're not familiar with stress already, stress is a normal reaction that the body has when changes occur, resulting in physical, emotional, and intellectual responses, right? And so the changes can come in many different forms. Like I said, the change in temperature, the change in environment can have an impact on your body's ability to adapt to that. And so the body will process all of this stressful information and then elicit either a positive or a negative response, depending on the degree of the stressful stimulus.
Yeah. And you got to say, like, there's a certain amount of stress that's, a good amount of stress, the type of stress that's, you know, gets a project done, gets you across the finish line. It's that stress never going away that becomes a problem. When we talk about the two different type of stress being, acute and chronic, if the acute stress doesn't go away, we start to call it chronic. And, like, it's almost like you can run 100 meters, but if you're asked to run another 400 meters, the body starts to fatigue. So we're okay for short bursts, but they have to be followed by a period of rest and restoration and allow the body to adapt further so that you're ready for your next episode. So, we recognize sometimes that, people say, well, you have to live a balanced life. I think there's no such thing as a balanced life. I think we have periods of time where we're unbalanced, balanced by periods of time that we are balanced, right? So I don't think balance means that we're balanced every hour of the day, but I think there's periods of time where we're running and there's periods of time where we're jogging and walking. Like, I had a good example, talk with my accountant who come in and, they're busy flat out from January to June, but then from June to December, they're not as busy. So there's balance in the sense that it's 6 months busy, 6 months not busy. But during January to June period, they're very busy. They're really out of balance. So if you look at it really focally, you could say that, that's not a balanced routine, but you have to put it out throughout the week. So what I tell people is that don't get caught up too much in the balance short term, but balance over long term. And if you do that, then the stress load is not going to be as high and you'll be able to adapt a little bit better.
Right. And so just speaking on the two types of stress, summarize, you can have an acute stressor, right? And this is like giving a speech, right? And so that'll
Yeah.
definitely really heighten you up and you might get a little nervous. The heart rate will go up, breathing rate goes up. But
Bungee
then you
jumping.
have, yeah, exactly. Bungee jumping. But then, once that stressor is over, the heart rate will regulate. The body goes back to its regular, it uses a process called homeostasis to bring it back in balance, like Dr. Roach was talking about earlier. However, when you have chronic stressors, the body doesn't get the chance to return back to that homeostatic state. So you either stay on one side or the other side, whether it be too heightened and aroused, which is what happens for most people, or not enough stress. And that's basically because not all stressors are bad. Some stressors are good because the body needs that change. It needs to be stressed a little bit in order to get stronger. That's the whole reason why we would go out and perform some physical activity and exercise. We want to
Yeah.
stress the body in order to build more muscle mass.
Yeah. And huge with women too, right? Like women that are going through hormonal changes and, are at risk of having osteoporosis. That stress on the bone. I mean, you go into a pool and you're swimming, there's not a lot of resistance there, right? So you have to do some weight bearing activity, stressing the joint so that you're able to maintain that bone density. So not all stress is created equal.
Absolutely. And so stress can present differently in everyone, right? As we know, it's multifactorial, and we'll be talking about the different types of stressors tonight. But, you can present stress with aches and pains, chest pain or feeling like your heart is racing, of course, because
Yep.
you're in that fight or flight situation, exhaustion, trouble sleeping, right? You're held awake. Headaches can come out of it, high blood pressure from the heart racing. Also, we talk about a weakened immune system. And so, if the body is stressed and you're constantly in this state, your body's essentially working against you at that point. And so, we'll be talking a little bit about the importance of lowering the stress levels tonight and why it's beneficial.
So let's talk about physical stress, Ben. We know that there's three different types of stress. The first one is the physical stress, and I'll just kind of table this conversation. We talk a little bit about, a little bit further, but I feel, I see physical stress as something that's never going to go away, right? Because the reality is, if you're at a job where your job is to sit at a computer all day long, and it's repetitive. So it doesn't have to be sitting at a computer all day long. It could be, sitting, in a car all day long. It could be standing all day long. But that repetitiveness of our day forces our joints to move the same way all the time. And unfortunately, the same joints to move because you're using the same joints all the time. That just doesn't go away, right? You can't, not everybody can say, well, I don't like my job. There's physical stress. I'm going to retire. So I had this discussion with a patient today. I said, look, if we're looking at your teeth and you're going to continue to, to eat and, at times not bad 1,000 on your healthy diet, you're going to eat some sugar. That's the stress. We call that chemical stress. Well, in order to maintain the integrity of your teeth, you need to brush your teeth accordingly. So if you're eating more sugar, you got to brush your teeth a little bit more. In terms of the physical stress, we need to take into account how much physical stress our body is under, right? We do the same thing, Ben, when we're taking on the treatment plan. What is this person exposed to on a regular basis? That has to come into play when we're doing a treatment plan. So what do? It's not going to go away. So you have to mitigate the risk of that stress taking over the body by doing things that are going to combat that stress and the ability of that stress to take over. So we have to do everything we can to allow our body to adapt easier and raise, the likelihood of it being able to adapt to the stress that we're exposed to, in this case, physical stress. So let's talk about that in terms of, what we can do for that.
Yeah, and so that's when chiropractic comes into play, right? So reducing the amount of tension on the joints by adjusting the segments that are under the most amount of physical stress. For example, if you're, looking at the picture to the right there, you can see that the individual is perched in front of their computer. There's a huge kyphosis through the neck, which is putting a physical stressor on the segments of the back, putting it in a position where if it doesn't get the proper nourishment and the proper movement, it could potentially lead to an injury, right? And so we want to be able to protect that spine by adjusting it and taking it into a position where there's the least amount of stress on the spine.
Yeah.
The way that I see physical stress is very similar to something called environmental stress. So that's why I have the plant to the left.
Yeah. Why is the plant there?
So the plant is there because the environment has to be conducive for the plant to grow. And so if the environment and the chemistry, the physical environment isn't enough for the plant to grow, then the plant will suffer, or it will grow in a way that we didn't want it to grow, that we didn't plan for it to grow. And so you want to be able to produce an environment that will lead to the growth and health of that plant. And so the same thing is said for the growth of the spine. Now, what if it's in an environment that isn't conducive with its growth? What can we do to help create a better environment so that that plant grows the way that we want? And so that's where you can kind of compare apples to apples to the physical environment of the worker to the right. So the environment that he's working in isn't necessarily an environment that's going to be healthiest for his spine. And so we have to be able to find a way to make it so that that spine is more resilient in that environment. And we would do the same thing for the plant.
I like that. And the plant has to be resilient to, external circumstances like a dry season, like crops, right? And there's too much rain and there's too much this and there's too much that. our body is exposed to the same environmental stimulus or stimuli that forces our body to react. And how your body reacts is going to be, for survival, right? So how much our nervous system stresses to survive is equal to the impact it's going to have negatively on our health. So the more that we can do to help mitigate the stressors. I had a great conversation today. One of my patients was saying that, he works standing most of the time. He has a stand-up desk and he says, I work better standing. But he says, obviously, after a while, my lower back hurts. And he's got one of those deep curves in the lower back. So he's hyperlordotic, we would call. And I said, well, we'll just call him John. I said, John, what you can do is when you're standing at a desk, just have a little bit of a step stool that you can kind of alternate putting one leg on the stool and then you alternate to the other one and you go back and forth. He says, that's a great idea. I said, well, the reason it's a good idea is because I came up with it. I'm just kidding. The reason it's a good idea is because when you're putting one leg up, you're sending the pelvis into flexion, right? So he's got a big curve. So he's always in extension. So he's like, his back is arching. So by putting one leg up, then he's taking the pressure, the load off the lower back. So we're dissipating the forces so that they're not centered around one area that's really the dysfunctional area in his lower back. So again, there's little tips and tricks that you can do to help reduce the amount of stress within your environment, whatever that environment might be.
Yeah, like that's kind of like putting if we're talking back about the plant, right? So you're putting kind of like one of those sticks off to the side and tying it around the plant so that it stays nice and straight and it doesn't fall over and, eventually lead to to the death of that plant. And so a similar way, you're trying to create a better environment for the individual to succeed. And so these are examples of physical stress, and not all physical stressors are bad. Like we need some physical stress
Yeah.
to increase the health of our bodies, right? So if we want to improve cardiovascular health, what do? We go out for a walk, we go out for a run. We're stressing our body. We're getting our lungs breathing. We're upping our heart rate. The same thing can be said for when we're working out, right? We want to build more muscle mass. We're going to have to stress that system a little bit to
Yeah.
get those muscles to grow.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think with stress comes growth, right? Like it's anything, and it's pervasive amongst many different examples in life. Um, I used to get stress, during exam time, right? But what did stress cause me to do? Study a little bit more, so I got stressed less, so that I was more prepared. Well, as you study more, you learn more, and I think stress is a good thing as long as it pushes you over the edge a little bit but just not letting it get chronic. Like again, the two types of stress is acute and chronic. You might be able to get away from, a dog that's running after you, but you know, you won't keep up with them for over 200 or 300 meters, right? So at one point you need little breaks here and there, hence the balance throughout the long term. All right, emotional stress.
Yeah, so emotional stress is from our environment. These are the things that are thought up in our minds. So situations, that possibly happened in the past, right? And so a lot of people will oftentimes get stressed about, oh, well, did I say the right thing back there? Did I do that? And then you
Yeah.
oftentimes will catch yourself, or it can be about a situation that you were in, or maybe you were part of, or you heard about. Some people get very stressed about their family situations, their family dynamics, or maybe what's going on between themselves and a friend or their girlfriend, etc., boyfriend. And so emotional stress can manifest in many different ways. And I want to talk a little bit about the science of the release of a hormone called cortisol. And so this hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, this is all up in the brain here. When you start to feel this emotional stress, this is the area of the brain that releases this catecholamine called cortisol. And cortisol is the main glucocorticoid released from that gland, and it will increase your heart rate, it'll increase your breathing rate, and it'll make your extremities really cold. So maybe you're someone who, when you get really nervous, you'll get very, very cold hands. Um, and its excess release can lead to different types of diseases such as Cushing's disease, cortical insufficiency, Addison's disease. And so there's a lot of things that can happen when we're emotionally stressed. And when someone tells you that they're stressed, you can certainly tell. The physical manifestations are right there on their face.
Yeah. Um, I think with with emotional stress, I just had a comment there for somebody who said, it's true, we worry about things that haven't happened yet, right? So we can't, calm our brains down. The thing with cortisol is basically, the hormone that wakes us up in the morning. Like cortisol is at its highest during the morning. So, when cortisol starts to peak during the night, those are the type of people that wake up in the middle of the night, right? So there's two types of sleeping issues: the people that can't fall asleep and the people that wake up in the middle of the night multiple times. Usually the reason the people wake up in the middle of the night is because their cortisol spikes at various times during the night. So it's hard when the cortisol spikes to calm back down, which is why a lot of times people wake up in the middle of the night and they got a hard time falling asleep again. So cortisol is very important. It's not a bad hormone, right? But the side effects of too much cortisol as a result of too much uncontrolled stress over a chronic period of time, you got to look at the whole story, right? So you can't just say, well, you have too much cortisol and that's bad, because cortisol is a good thing. But what's happening, to drive that cortisol through that hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, and how everything is kind of going from one to the other, because you can get caught in that whole vicious cycle of not sleeping. Stress causes you not to sleep. You don't sleep, you get stressed, and then you're caught into that pattern that's really hard to get out of. And then you basically go to bed worried that you're not going to be able to fall asleep. Well, what does that do? Well, you don't fall asleep, right? So that's that's a tough cycle to be in.
Yeah, and when your cortisol is speaking to you, right? When it's sort of yelling at you at these different points in time, we had a hump day conversation in the past about sleep and the importance of getting into a healthy routine, right? And so one of the best ways to help regulate your hormones is to try to switch things up and do the same things. Do some healthy routines during the day, or at least plan your day out. So in that way, you're running into less unexpected things and you can expect a little bit more out of your day. So different ways to sort of lead to that. Another reason why cortisol isn't necessarily great is because it's pro-inflammatory, and so it causes inflammation and that inflammatory response in that process, which can definitely make your pains, your aches and pains much more apparent. And so trying to reduce the amount of stress hormone and cortisol in the blood is crucial in someone's ability to heal and ultimately overcome that big stressor.
Yeah. I mean, we've talked about the importance of calming down the inflammation in your body and the effect inflammation can have. So, it's no wonder when people are stressed, they don't feel great, right? And when they don't feel great, they don't exercise because it hurts. And when they don't exercise, they don't get rid of some of their stress. And it, again, another example of a vicious cycle. So, yeah, managing the inflammation is very good. And then there's other things that can come into play as well as your diet, right? So, we can hit, usually emotional stress is going to be a multifactorial um, thing as in terms of treatment plan and how to address it. So,
Yeah, and this emotional stress is a great segue into our next stressor as well, chemical stress. So chemical stress is from the foods that we eat, and it's an important stressor to consider when we're dealing with our emotional stress, because we know a lot of people who will start to stress eat. And so why do we crave sugar so much when we're stressed, right? People will automatically start eating, junk foods or copious amount. And this is because there is an actual link between eating sugar and it having a negative feedback loop to the release of cortisol and stress hormones. And so it actually calms things down. But the negative effect is the chemicals and that sugar that you're consuming, right? And so you're kind of, at a double-edged sword here because, yeah, you're using the food to manage the stress that you're experiencing, but the chemicals that you're taking into your body will stress you just as much.
Mm,
So I thought that that was an interesting thing that you're using the coping, but it's not necessarily helping you.
yeah. And there's also the release of dopamine with the intake of sugar, right? So, the dopamine gives you that high because usually when people are stressed, sometimes they could be depressed a little bit and they're not at their best mood, so to speak. So, eating sugar also brings that mood up a little bit by the short-term effect of the dopamine release. And I think sometimes too, there can be an emotional part to the eating as well, where there's certain comfort foods that kind of bring you back, like your old parts of your brain, your limbic system, bring back memories, in terms of what brought you comfort when you were a child. Maybe you sat on the couch and watched a movie and ate popcorn or whatever, and that's your comfort zone go to when things get rough and stressed. And so there is that emotional aspect of you know what eating does in terms of bringing you comfort, I guess.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm just looking at those donuts now, and I'm just thinking,
Oh,
all I have going through my mind is comfort, comfort, comfort. That looks so good.
yeah.
We've also got, yeah, so sugars are bad for they increase joint and muscle inflammation, and that's where, it comes into play and
You ever
ultimately
have a Krispy
reducing that
Kreme?
intake. I have. I've had many Krispy Kremes, and they're very good.
Or you're not supposed to say that, but I was just asking you if you had one. You didn't have to say you had many.
Sorry, the cat's out of the bag.
Cat's out of the
I like
bag.
donuts. Um,
True story. I was doing my studies in Georgia. It's the first time I ever saw a Krispy Kreme was when I was in the US doing my studies. I was with my friend and we were just driving and all of a sudden he comes to like a halt almost on the highway. I'm like, what's happening? Is there an accident happening? He said, no, the sign just went on at Krispy Kreme. He saw the sign come on. And what it means when the sign is on at Krispy Kreme, for those of you who don't know Krispy Kreme, is the donuts just came out of the oven and they're warm. So he wanted to stop at Krispy Kreme. So almost causing an accident to get Krispy Kreme donuts.
wow. Yeah, I'd be stressed. My emotional stressors would be much, much higher. We talk about smoking all the time. We all know the negative effects of smoking. We probably sound like a broken record. Um, but nicotine negatively, sorry, affects the bone building cells, so the osteoblasts, and it slows the reproduction of these cells, and so it makes our bones a lot weaker. So we're stopping that production there. You get poor healing after a break, and same thing, not just for bones, but poor healing in skin tissue as well. And so the body is in a position where it's poor to heal. And so when you're starting to try to take care of that as a chiropractor, the patient has to understand that the healing isn't going to be as fast as, as a non-smoker, for example.
Yeah, no, that's really true, and I've seen that a lot. Like with people, like I feel bad sometimes because people are going through stressful periods, and we're getting close to a stressful period being Christmas, and Christmas brings a lot of things. It brings family dynamics, it brings financial stress, it brings chemical stress because we don't eat usually that healthy during the holidays. And bear in mind, guys, it's not what you're going to eat in 1 week, being the Christmas holiday, that's going to ruin you. It's what you eat during the rest of the 51 weeks. So don't put too much emphasis and stress on what you eat during the holidays. Like we're all, whoever here says that they bat 1,000 on their diet every single day, um, I'm going to call them a liar. So we all fall off the tracks once in a while. But knowing that we're going through this period, I can literally tell you that the people that need the most care during these holidays are the ones that tell me they don't have time to come in. Right. So if you don't have 15 minutes in your life to make a little detour in your routine during the day to come and get adjusted and do what it takes, you're willing to take the risk of not having a life. Meaning, what I mean by that is that, you don't value taking care of yourself, taking 15 minutes just to do something for yourself. Like you need to be worthy of your self-worth, or know what your self-worth is, to take care of yourself, because you can't take care of others if you're not healthy yourself, right? You can't be everything to your kids. You can't be everything to your mom that you're taking care of, your dad you're taking care of, and everything that your job. You can't be everything to everybody if you're not taking care of yourself. So make sure that you make the time to be everything that you can be, and allow your body to be able to be as healthy as it can, so it can adapt to the stress that's inevitable coming up in the holiday season. You are going to get stress, right? Nobody's naive enough to think it's not going to be there. Every year it happens, right? So it is going to be there.
Yeah.
What do
And
you do to prevent it and prevent the effects of it taking a hold of you? That's the key.
that's the key. And one of the big tips and tricks that we gave from last year's stress conversation, especially when we were heading into the New Year's and heading into holidays, was go into the holiday season with less rules, fewer expectations for other people. Sometimes we go in and we expect, this person to show up and they're going to do this and they're going to do that. No, don't put the rules on others. Go in with a blank slate, go in with a positive attitude of, I'm not expecting, a lot. I'm just expecting to be with these people and I know that they're going to be there, or I'm going to have my family, or what's going to happen. Just go into the situation and you'll adapt much better with less and less rules, holding yourself, um, holding yourself to that standard. So I have alcohol on the chemical stress list as well. And so we all know the negative effects of alcohol on the intestinal and digestive system. And so it decreases the healing in that area as well. And so you can't, because the liver as well is not functioning at its optimal, you can't detox the stomach as well. It also leads to gout attacks. And so alcohols, wines are filled with something called a purine, which is pro-inflammatory. And so for those who have gout, you'll notice that alcohol and red meats makes it a lot worse. So you'll end up with a very large and swollen toe. So just the effects of chemical stress and its effects on your nervous system. And so as chiropractors, we work to eliminate some of these from our patients' environment.
Yeah. No, I agree. What else? I think that's it. Maybe I'll just open it up real quick. If you guys have any questions, just let us know. We still have a little bit of time, and then we're going to go into our supplement of the month. One thing I just want to say, again, just to touch base on the holidays. One of the things that I value in life the most, and maybe this will speak to some of you, and maybe it won't. Okay, but I'm just going to share a little bit of transparency and be authentic with you guys. And if you like this, then give me a heart and thumbs up. But one of the things that I value in life the most, and it's a commodity that once you waste it, it never comes back. It's time, right? And many of us are running out of time because our time gets taken up with a lot of things. And whether we feel that those things are important or not important, seem like an emergency, at the end of the day, we never say, I had too much time for myself today, right? So the day goes by, and one of the things that we often say is that we ran out of time, right? It seems like time is always being taken away from us. So at the end of the day, what I tell myself is whatever time that I have left after the necessary thing, which is, going to work and doing the things that are part of your day that just need to get done, the amount of time that's left in your day, the people that you choose to bring into that time, whether it be, obviously there's going to be kids in there and they're going to chip away at whatever time is left, your relationship with your wife or your husband, there's a little bit of time left. Whoever you choose to spend that time with, whether it be during the holidays or during, sporting events or date nights, not date nights, but, night outs with friends, you have to make sure that those people value who you are, because there's nothing more that I hate than spending time with somebody that you feel you have to be a different person in order for them to accept you, right? So sometimes during the holidays, some of you might be spending time with people you feel you have to be different in front of in order for them to accept you as a person. There is nothing worse for human beings to not be able to cherish who we are as human beings, right? And being who we are. So one of the things that I invite you to do is, just take inventory of your life and the people that allow you to be you versus the people that make you feel like you have to perform for their love, right? So going into the holidays, I think that's something that, if it resonates with you guys, and, maybe some of you said, you know what, that's exactly me. I feel like I got to be fake with somebody, or I can't be myself. Make sure that you do you, right? And like Ben said, go into the holidays with less rules. Guess what? If just being you is not enough, it's probably not people you want to hang with, right? So be you, be your authentic self, and that way you don't have to worry about, what people think about you, because you are enough. I'm done preaching. Hopefully that resonates with somebody. Make sense?
Makes sense. Yep.
All right. So, supplement of the month.
Vitamin D with K2. Now,
bring the sun to you.
Bringing the sunshine. So yeah, vitamin D. We're getting into this time of year. Like, I'm waking up, I'm going to work, and it's dark. And I get here and to work, and it's still dark. And then we treat all day, and then we leave, and it's dark. And so raise your hand if you're resonating with me a little bit, because yeah, we need that sunlight, and it's important not just for getting a tan. There's a lot more than just that. And so it can boost your immune activity, and especially when we're heading into the winter months where, colds, and it's getting colder out, and our bodies can't always adapt to that change. And so we'll get a cold. So we want to be able to kind of boost that and give our bodies the best chance we can possibly have. It's shown to elevate mood. And so those who, they did a study, those who were suffering from depression were also shown to have low levels of vitamin D. And so definitely when we're not getting that sunlight, that natural vitamin D, we should be boosting up. It's also good in terms of helping calcium absorption. So making sure that we have stronger bones. So vitamin D with K2. You also want to make sure you have proper magnesium levels as well, because it will help with that absorption. We learned that last week in our talk with Dr. Brian Raid. So check that out.
That's it. So thank you so much, guys, for chiming in. We are going to have I think we should have a Q&A session there soon. We'll do that. And then meanwhile, we are going to look for another invited guest next month. If you guys know of anybody that might be of interest to the group that you think would bring value, for sure, just tell us in the comment section, and we'd be glad to reach out and have them entertain us for 45 minutes to an hour on preferably a health topic. So we'll see what you guys have.
So thank you guys so much for tuning in for another episode of Hump Day Conversations. This was Hump Day Conversation number 46. I'm Dr. Ben Boudreau. That's Dr. Clayton Roach from Roach Chiropractic Center in Bedford. Again, thanks for tuning in with us, and we will see you guys again next week. And have a great, great, great week. Try to managing those stressors in your life.
Awesome. Take care, guys. Have a great night.
What's up, guys? Listen, if you like this episode, you'll probably like the other ones. Chances are pretty good, so here's what you need to do. You need to like us and follow us on Facebook. Following means you get notified when these two guys are live. Next, family, friends. You need to share these episodes because you never know. You might help them because they need this information as well.
And guys, if you ever miss an episode, make sure you subscribe to us on YouTube. That way you can watch the episode over and over and over again.
Guys, we love you and appreciate you.
Take care.